The atmospheric processor on level 4 had been dying for 6 days. Solon knew this the moment the transport's landing struts touched Titan's surface, not because anyone told her, but because she could hear it. A 0.3 Hz variance in the pressure cycling, a sound most humans would mistake for normal mechanical aging. She had said nothing. She was not here to be useful. She was here to be a message. The transport doors opened and cold hit her like a hand across the face. Not Titan's cold, the regulated chill of a colonial hangar maintained at the lowest survivable threshold for human workers. Economy, not comfort. Everything about New Cascade communicated the same thing. We are holding on. We are barely holding on. The draconian diplomatic vessel behind her gleamed like an insult in a room full of scrap. A man in oil-stained coveralls was watching from the far end of the maintenance bay. He was not starring the way the others were, the cluster of colonial workers who had gone silent at her appearance, eyes moving across her body with the particular calculation she had learned to recognize before she could name it. He was watching the way she had seen engineers watch failing systems, trying to understand the function before forming an opinion about the form. She filed that away and said nothing. Governor Pell arrived 3 minutes later in a state of visible distress. He was a small man made smaller by anxiety, and he introduced himself twice before realizing he had already done it once. Behind him, 2 administrative aides pretended to review documents on their tablets and instead stared at Solon's hands, her jaw, the breadth of her shoulders. She was accustomed to being studied. She had learned to become a surface, reflective, revealing nothing. "Your Highness," Pell began, then stopped, then began again. "We were expecting, that is, the manifest indicated there were components listed, filtration components specifically, and instead." "Instead you received me," Solon said. Her voice carried the natural harmonic resonance of draconian physiology, each word slightly layered, slightly musical. She had been told it was unsettling. "I understand this is not what was arranged." "It's an honor," Pell said immediately, and she could see the precise moment he decided to believe this. "An extraordinary honor, a diplomatic exchange of this. The Emperor sent me because he wished to communicate his opinion of your colony." She watched Pell's face move through several expressions in rapid succession. "I would rather you understood that clearly than spent energy pretending otherwise." Pell looked at his aides. His aides looked at their tablets. The man in the oil-stained coveralls, who had crossed the hangar at some point without her noticing, said, "I'm Davin Reyes, Life Support and Atmospheric Maintenance. The governor asked me to handle your integration." He said it the way he might have said, "I'm Davin Reyes, I'll be fixing your ventilation today." Practical, without ceremony. He looked at her the same way he'd looked at her from across the hangar, not with assessment exactly, with attention. "Solon," she said, not the title, not the full name. She had not done that in years, had not offered the unarmored version of her name to someone she had known for less than 30 seconds. She wasn't sure what made her do it now. Davin nodded as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. "Pell, I've got it from here." He showed her through corridors that smelled of recycled air and machine oil, past junctions where the walls showed the seams of multiple construction phases. New Cascade had grown in layers, each addition slightly mismatched with the last, the whole structure held together by maintenance rather than design. Solon cataloged system sounds as she walked. The level 4 processor was worse than she had initially estimated. There was secondary degradation in the coolant exchange as well. She said nothing. Davin did not fill the silence with explanation or apology. He walked at a pace she could match without effort, pointed out relevant junctions, mess hall, medical, the primary workshop, and asked her one question. "Is there anything you need that isn't going to be in the standard supply inventory?" She looked at him. On Draconia, the question people asked upon her arrival was always some variant of "What should we do with you?" "I don't know yet," she said. "That's fine." He stopped at a door near the end of a residential corridor and opened it. "This is yours." The room was small. 1 bunk, 1 desk, a narrow window overlooking the refinery sector where cooling towers exhaled pale vapor into Titan's amber atmosphere. It was larger than her quarters in the lower palace. She did not say this. "It's not much," Davin said, not apologetically, just accurately. "It's sufficient." She crossed to the window. Beyond the refineries, the sky was the color of an old bruise, layered amber over a brown so deep it was almost red. Saturn was not visible from this angle, but she knew it was there. She had watched it during descent, that impossible ringed presence filling a third of the sky. Nothing on Draconia Prime prepared you for Saturn. If the integration is uncomfortable, Davin said, my workshop is on sub-level 3. You can come down, it's quiet there. She turned to look at him. He was already in the doorway, not lingering, not managing her, just leaving the door open in the most literal sense. Why would you offer that? He seemed to think about this with more seriousness than the question warranted. I keep life support running. That means I spend a lot of time noticing things that aren't working right. You got here an hour ago, and I can already tell that being visible in communal spaces is going to cost you something. He shrugged. Sub-level 3 is a low-traffic area, that's all. After he left, Solon stood in the center of the small room for a long moment. She was not accustomed to people who offered practical kindness without requiring anything in return. She was not sure what to do with it. She unpacked her single case, sat on the bunk, looked at the amber sky. Somewhere below her, the level 4 processor continued its slow, irregular breathing. She thought 30,000 people depend on that machine. She thought, it is not my problem. She lay down and looked at the ceiling and listened to the colony's systems the way she had listened since childhood. The way the palace engineers had said was unnecessary, obsessive, unladylike, and heard, threaded through the ordinary mechanical noise of New Cascade, the particular silence of things beginning to fail. She went to the workshop at 400 when the corridors were empty. It was a large space, organized with the specific logic of a single person who had used it for years, not clean, exactly, but purposeful. Every tool in a location that made sense if you understood the work. Equipment stacked by frequency of use rather than by size. A secondary diagnostic array that had clearly been rebuilt from components of at least 3 different original units. The primary diagnostic scanner was on the central table. Solon looked at it for a moment. Then she sat down and began to open it. She was not thinking about consequences. She was thinking about the 0.3 Hz variance and the coolant exchange degradation, and the fact that you could not accurately diagnose either with a scanner running a 3% measurement error in its quantum relay array. She had identified the fault within 40 seconds of looking at the machine. She had no permission to touch it. She touched it anyway. She was 3 components deep when the lights came on. Davin stood in the doorway. He looked at her, at the disassembled scanner, at the components laid out in precise order on the workbench beside it. His expression did not change. That's 40,000 credits of equipment, he said. Your secondary quantum relay is degrading. She did not look up. The variance in diagnostic returns is currently at 3%. If you continue using degraded diagnostics on the atmospheric systems in sections 4 through 9, your oxygen scrubbers will fail within the next 6 to 8 weeks. You'll have cascade failures in the subgrid before you identify the source. She held up the relay component. This can be regenerated or replaced. Without correction, you will eventually lose people. The silence lasted long enough that she finally looked at him. His expression had changed, not to anger, to the focused, slightly narrowed attention she was beginning to recognize as his version of full engagement. How long have you been here? He said. 19 hours. And you identified all of that in. The level 4 processor fault was audible during landing. She set the relay down. I apologize for touching your equipment without permission. I'll reassemble it as I found it if you prefer. Davin crossed to the bench and looked at the components. He picked up the relay housing, turned it, set it back. Show me what you're seeing, he said. They worked for 2 hours. Solon explained the fault cascade the way she explained most technical problems. Simply, directly, assuming the person she was speaking to could follow if she was clear enough. Davin followed. More than followed. He asked questions that built on her explanations rather than merely confirming them, offered observations about the specific quirks of New Cascade's aging equipment that she could not have known, and caught one secondary fault she had missed entirely because it was buried in a maintenance log, anomaly rather than an acoustic signature. By the time they had finished, the scanner's diagnostic sensitivity had improved by 11% over its original specification. Where did you train? Davin asked. She felt the familiar weight settle across her shoulders. Imperial Academy, 7 years, top percentile in systems engineering, quantum mechanics, atmospheric dynamics, structural analysis, and 3 additional disciplines. She kept her voice flat. I graduated at 19. My class received a formal commendation. I was given a certificate of completion and a suggestion that I might find fulfillment in administrative coordination. Davin looked at her. Administrative coordination. I was the seventh daughter of Emperor Vorak. I was also, she stopped. She knew the word, everyone knew the word. Physically inconsistent with draconian aesthetic standards, the Academy created a special designation to avoid conferring traditional honors on my graduating class while I was part of it. My sister, who ranked 20th, received the Medal of Excellence. She paused. I received applause. The workshop was quiet. Outside, the refinery towers exhaled their pale vapor into the dark. "Your father is an idiot," Davin said. The simplicity of it startled a sound out of her, not quite a laugh, but something in the same neighborhood, something she had not made in a long time. That is a considerable statement about an emperor. Any leader who ignores competence because of appearance is running on superstition. He said it the way he said most things, without inflection, without performance, just as a fact he had assessed and found to be true. It's also bad engineering. You build a system that way, it fails. Solon looked at the repaired scanner, at the clean, ordered row of components she had extracted and examined and returned. She thought about the word useful, which she had not applied to herself in years without irony. "Thank you," she said, "for the work." "Thank you for the scanner." He began closing the casing. "Come back when you want. I'm usually here by 300. She walked back through the quiet corridors toward her small room overlooking the refineries. Titan's sky was beginning its slow shift toward the amber of mid-cycle, the light thickening at the edges of the clouds. For the first time since the transport had lifted from Draconia Prime, she did not feel like a message. She felt cautiously like a person who had just done something real. She thought, the level 4 processor still needs attention. She thought, I'll look at it tomorrow. She allowed herself, quietly, in the empty corridor with no one to observe the moment, to almost smile. 3 weeks passed the way good things sometimes do, quietly, without announcing themselves. Solon learned the shape of New Cascade the way she had learned every system she had ever studied, by listening before speaking, by watching the patterns before touching the variables. The colony had a rhythm to it, human in its irregularity, nothing like the severe clockwork of the imperial palace. People ate at different hours. Maintenance schedules slipped and were caught and slipped again. Children ran in the corridors near the residential sectors in defiance of posted regulations, and no one enforced the regulations because the corridors were the only place wide enough to run. She observed all of this from the margins, which was where she had always existed, and found that the margins of New Cascade were warmer than the center of most places she had been. She did not eat in the cafeteria for the first 4 days. She took rations from the dispensary near her quarters and ate alone in the workshop during the hours she had begun to think of as hers. The deep pre-dawn stretch between 300 and 600, when only Davin was reliably present, and the corridors belonged to the sound of machinery rather than people. On the 5th day, Davin said, without preamble, "The cafeteria food is genuinely terrible, but eating alone in a sub-level gets to you eventually." She had looked at him. "I'm accustomed to it." Being accustomed to something isn't the same as it being fine. He set down his calibration tool. "I'm going at 7:30, you can come or not." She had gone, not because she believed it would be without cost, but because she had begun to understand that Davin Reyes assessed situations accurately, and she had no better data to contradict him. The cafeteria fell silent when she entered. Solon had a long history with rooms going silent. She knew the specific quality of this silence. The way sound didn't simply stop but thickened, became textured with awareness, with the small recalibrations people performed when something unexpected appeared in their environment. She walked to the serving line with the deliberate composure she had refined over years of being looked at, selected a tray, and began to choose her food. The voice came from a table near the far wall. A cargo worker, large in the way that came from labor rather than genetics, with the particular confidence of a man who had never once been the unexpected thing in the room. "Didn't know we were getting visited by the mother ship today." Solon did not turn. She already knew the type, had known it since she was 6 years old, and first understood that certain people experienced other people's visibility as provocation. Wonder if they recalibrated the landing bay for weight distribution. Laughter not from everyone, she noted that, only from a specific cluster of people who already knew him, who had already established the habit of finding him funny. The rest of the cafeteria maintained its silence with a different quality now. Uncomfortable. Waiting. Solon selected a portion of the protein grain and moved along the line. "Your concern for structural engineering is admirable," she said, her voice carrying its natural harmonic quality, clear across the room without effort. "Though I'd focus that energy on your colony's coolant exchange systems. The weight distribution there is considerably more relevant to your continued survival." A beat of silence, then something shifted in the room, not quite laughter, but its precursor. The cargo worker's table had gone flat. She carried her tray to an empty table near the window and sat down. The composure was real. The cost of it was also real, running underneath the composure like the subharmonic fault in the level 4 processor, present, measurable, invisible to anyone who didn't know how to listen. Davin sat down across from her without asking. She said, "You don't have to." "I know," he opened his tray. "The protein grain is better than it looks, which isn't saying much." They ate. The cafeteria gradually resumed its noise around them, not warmly, but normally, which was sufficient. At the far table, the cargo worker said something quieter to his companions and did not look in her direction again. After a few minutes, Davin said, "You didn't have to answer him." "I know," she considered the protein grain. It was, as stated, marginally better than it looked. "But silence reads as injury to that type. It confirms what they want to believe." She paused. "Technical redirection reads as indifference. It is much harder to perform cruelty for an audience that has stopped laughing." Davin was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like something you learned from experience rather than theory." "Most useful things are." He nodded. They ate in silence for a while, a silence that had, she was beginning to notice, a different quality from other silences she had known. Not empty, not loaded. Simply comfortable the way a well-calibrated system was comfortable, nothing straining, nothing forced, everything functioning at its proper tolerance. "On Draconia," she said, and was mildly surprised to find herself continuing, "the royal family eats once daily, minimal portions, communal meals are formal, silent, monitored." She looked at the window at the pale refinery light. "When I was young, I used to go to the servant quarters in the lower levels after the formal meal. They cooked differently there with actual ingredients, with spices." She paused. It was technically a violation of household protocol, everyone knew. "No one stopped me because I was already the embarrassment. One more infraction registered as irrelevant." "What did they cook?" She looked at him. It was not the response she had expected. Not that must have been lonely or your father should have, the two responses she had learned to anticipate. Just, what did they cook? "A root grain with fermented spice paste, sour and warm, nothing elegant." She almost smiled. "It was the best thing I ate in 23 years in that palace." "I can source spices," Davin said. "The hydroponics team grows more than they report in inventory. If you tell me what you're looking for, I can probably find something in the neighborhood." She looked at him for a long moment. This was, she thought, a very small thing. It was also not a small thing at all. "Why do you do this?" she asked. "Do what?" "Extend yourself. You have no obligation. My presence here is a diplomatic inconvenience at best." She kept her voice even. "You assigned yourself to my integration, which no one required of you. You offered your workshop. You sat down here." Davin appeared to consider the question with genuine attention. "I fix things," he said finally. "Not people, that's not what I mean, but I'm good at seeing what's damaged versus what's just been treated badly. Systems that are treated badly start to behave as if they're broken. They're not. They just need someone to work with them correctly." He met her eyes. "That's all." Solon was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a maintenance hauler moved slowly across the refinery floor, its work lights amber against the amber sky, doubling the warmth. "I have been treated badly for a long time," she said. "I know," Davin said. "That's why I sat down." She found the hydroponics bay on a rest day, following the faint trace of organic humidity through the circulation system. The technician on duty, a young woman named Petra, looked startled for exactly 3 seconds and then decided, visibly, to be unbothered. Solon explained what she was looking for. Petra disappeared into the back shelving and returned with a small container of dried root and a jar of something dark and fermented that smelled almost right. "We're not supposed to," Petra began. "I worked on your atmospheric filtration subgrid last week," Solon said. "The secondary recycler in Sector 7. It had a resonance fault that would have degraded your humidity control within 4 months." Petra looked at the jar, looked at Solon. How do you take your coffee? She had been on New Cascade for 18 days when she began fixing things without being asked. Not loudly, not in ways that required acknowledgement. She left calibration notes in the maintenance logs, unsigned, flagging fault patterns in the atmospheric systems before they became emergencies. She rerouted a degraded power conduit in the residential Sector 3 during an early morning pass when the corridor was empty. She rewrote the diagnostic protocol for the Section 4 oxygen scrubbers in a way that cut response time by 22%, uploaded it to the maintenance server under a generic timestamp, and said nothing. Davin knew. She was aware of this. He said nothing either. He simply began leaving extra calibration tools on the workbench before she arrived and stopped locking the diagnostic terminal in the corner where she preferred to work. This was, she understood, a form of language. She was beginning to learn his dialect of it. They fell into a pattern that neither of them named. Early mornings in the workshop. Occasional meals, not always in the cafeteria, sometimes ration packs eaten over schematics, Davin reading maintenance logs, Solon running simulations on the diagnostic terminal. He told her about Earth, which he had left at 17 and remembered with the specific fondness of someone who had been glad to go but acknowledged the loss. She told him about the Imperial Academy, which was easier to describe than the palace because the academy was about work, and work was a language she trusted. She did not tell him about the night before her transport departure, when the Emperor had responded to her final message home with 4 words, "Your presence there is the point." She had read it 3 times and then closed the channel and begun to pack her single case, which had not taken long because she had not been given much worth taking. She did not tell him, but sometimes in the workshop, in the comfortable silence that had become the most reliable thing in her life, she thought that he probably already knew. On the 21st day, the cargo worker came back. Solon was crossing the cafeteria alone. Davin was 2 levels down dealing with a coolant line. When the voice found her again, louder this time, performing for a larger table. Princess Piggy made it out of her workshop. She kept walking, fixed-point tray in hand, measured steps. "Hey, I'm talking to you. What's wrong? Embarrassed? You should be. You know why your dad sent you here, right? You know what it means that they wrapped you up and shipped you to a garbage colony. It means even the Empire has standards." The cafeteria had gone quiet again, that specific textured quiet. Solon set her tray down at the nearest empty table and sat. She unfolded her napkin. She was not going to give him a scene. She was not going to perform composure. She was simply going to eat her food because she was hungry, and this was the place where food was served, and his existence was not sufficient reason to alter her behavior. Her hands were steady. The thing underneath her hands was not. She had heard variations of this her entire life. She knew, with the precision of long study, that it did not become less sharp with repetition. It simply became more familiar, which was a different thing. She heard the cafeteria door open. "Roar," Davin's voice was quiet, not loud, it carried anyway. "We're done." "Chen, didn't know you were on princess duty today." "I'm not." Davin set his tray down across from Solon and sat without looking at the cargo worker again. "He does this often?" he asked her quietly. "Often enough." He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, walked to the cargo worker's table, leaned down, and said something very quietly that she could not hear. Whatever it was, the cargo worker's face did something complicated. He said nothing further. His companions looked at their food. Davin returned and sat back down. He picked up his fork. "What did you say to him?" Solon asked. "Reminded him that I maintain the life support systems for his residential sector." He began eating. "And that I have a fairly detailed understanding of what kind of discomfort a slightly miscalibrated atmospheric cycle in a sleeping quarter can cause without ever technically malfunctioning." Solon stared at him. "That's a threat." "It's a maintenance observation." She looked at her food. She felt something behind her sternum that she could not immediately classify: warm, slightly pressurized, unfamiliar. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he glanced up, "but I'm tired of watching it cost you something every time." She looked at him for a long moment. His attention was on his tray again, practical, unhurried. He had said it the way he said most things, as a simple fact he had observed and found worth statting. No one had ever said, "I'm tired of watching it cost you something." Not once in 31 years. She looked at her food. She ate. The cafeteria noise resumed around them. Outside the window, Titan's sky moved through its slow amber gradations, indifferent and enormous, and today, for reasons she could not yet fully name, not unkind. The ambassador arrived without warning, which Solon recognized immediately as deliberate. Unannounced arrivals were a specific tool in the imperial diplomatic repertoire, designed to catch colonial administrations mid-disarray, to establish the hierarchical calculus before anyone had time to compose themselves. She knew this because she had watched her father deploy the same tactic against subordinate systems her entire childhood. Walk in when they are unprepared. Let them see themselves through your eyes. The shame of their inadequacy does half your work before you open your mouth. She was in the workshop when the alert came through, Governor Pell's voice on the comm, clipped with anxiety, asking for both of them immediately. She and Davin arrived at the administrative level within 4 minutes of each other. The ambassador was already installed in the governor's office as though he had always been there and the office had been built around him. His name was Jakaveth. She had never met him, but she knew the type precisely: draconian imperial core, mid-tier, ambitious, the particular leanness of a man who had spent decades treating his body as evidence of virtue. He wore the gray and silver of the diplomatic directorate and looked at the contents of Pell's office the way someone looks at a meal they have already decided not to eat. His eyes found Solon and moved across her with the swift, dismissive precision of long practice. Then he looked away, which was its own form of statement. Your colony has experienced a 37% increase in atmospheric system failures in the past fiscal cycle, Jakaveth said, addressing Pell as though no one else was present. Such a rate of degradation reflects poorly on your technical competence and raises questions about the viability of continued treaty support. We extend partnership to functioning settlements. Pell's face had gone the particular color it turned under pressure, a gray-pink, like old putty. Ambassador, I assure you our maintenance teams have been working around them. I have a proposal. Jakaveth produced a data tablet and placed it on the desk with the care of someone laying down a piece in a game they have already won. A technical evaluation, a diagnostic scenario, the kind any competent engineer could resolve given adequate resources and training. He touched the screen. A schematic materialized above the desk, projected in cold blue light. A hypothetical atmospheric processor failure, multiple simultaneous system degradations. Identify the root cause and provide a complete stabilization protocol before total cascade failure. Solon looked at the schematic. She understood it in approximately 8 seconds. Not the solution, the schematic was designed to resist quick solutions. Layers of plausible-looking fault indicators arranged to draw attention toward symptoms and away from the actual failure origin. She understood the architecture of it. She had written examination problems with this same structure at the academy, back when she was a student instructor before her gender and body made the appointment inconvenient. You built the misleading components first. You made them flashy. Then you buried the real fault somewhere quiet, somewhere it could bleed pressure slowly while every competent engineer chased the obvious. This was not a diagnostic problem. It was a demonstration. Jakaveth wanted them to fail publicly, so he had documentation for a recommendation he had already written. You have 6 hours, Jakaveth said. Failure to produce a viable solution will be entered into the treaty assessment record as evidence of technical inadequacy at the administrative level. His gaze returned to Solon. Brief, flat. I trust you'll contribute what you can, Princess. I'd hate to report that even a colony of this caliber found your assistance negligible. After he left, Dr. Tanaka, head of environmental systems, a compact woman who moved with the efficiency of someone who had been in crisis mode for so long it had become her resting state, pulled the schematic to her own workstation and stared at it with the expression of someone reading a death notice. This is impossible, she said, even with the full team running parallel. It's solvable, Solon said. The room went quiet. Everyone looked at her. She had not planned to say it, or rather she had decided not to say it, had made the familiar internal calculation, the one she had been making since she was 8 years old, weighing the cost of visibility against the cost of silence. But 30,000 people lived in this colony. She had been listening to its systems for 3 weeks. She knew exactly where Jakaveth's schematic was lying, and she knew exactly why. The failure origin isn't in oxygen generation, she said. That's what he wants you to chase. The schematic is designed to look like a generation fault, pressure drop indicators across 3 subsystems, all pointing the same direction. But the variance pattern doesn't match a generation failure. It matches electromagnetic interference contaminating the sensor arrays. She crossed to the workstation and indicated the relevant junction cluster. The sensors are reading noise as pressure loss. You're not losing atmosphere. You're losing signal accuracy. Everything downstream is a phantom. Silence. Davin said, the coolant system. She looked at him. He was already at the secondary display, pulling up thermal schematics. The quantum core harmonics, he continued. If the core is running at the wrong resonance frequency, it generates M interference in exactly that band. Yes, Solon said. It came out with more warmth than she intended. Dr. Tanaka was already moving. How long to verify? 40 minutes to confirm the interference signature. 3 hours to model the thermal buffer solution and run sufficient simulations to guarantee stability. Solon paused. We have 2 hours of margin. Why 2 hours of margin? One of the engineers asked. Solon glanced at Davin. He was looking at her with an expression she was still learning to read, something quiet and intent, the particular focus he brought to things he found worth paying full attention to. She looked back at the schematic. Because we are going to make him wait, she said. They worked through the deep hours of Titan's night cycle. Dr. Tanaka's team was good, thorough, experienced, committed in the way that people who genuinely understood that their work kept others alive tended to be committed. But within the first hour it became clear that Solon was operating at a different altitude, and to Dr. Tanaka's considerable credit, she recognized this immediately and reorganized accordingly, channeling her team's efforts through Solon's analysis rather than running parallel to it. Solon worked the way she always worked when no one was evaluating her, quickly, fluidly, the internal architecture of the problem visible to her in a way she had stopped trying to describe to others, because the description was never as fast as the understanding. She moved through the schematic layers the way she moved through the workshop in the early hours, purposefully, without wasted motion, following the logic wherever it led rather than where it was expected to go. Davin worked beside her, not at her level on the theoretical side. He was honest about this without apparent discomfort, which she found remarkable, but contributing at every practical junction, catching implementation details that her modeling glossed over, knowing the specific behavioral quirks of atmospheric hardware that no simulation fully captured. At one point, he corrected a thermal buffer calculation she had made, not because her mathematics were wrong, but because the specific coolant compound used in New Cascade's older processor units had a viscosity variance at low pressure that changed the effective transfer coefficient by 4%. He knew this because he had replaced those units 17 times. She adjusted the model without comment. He moved on without acknowledgement. It was the most functional collaborative dynamic she had ever experienced. Around the second hour, in a quiet stretch while simulations ran and the rest of the team was reviewing outputs across the room, Davin said, without looking up from his display, "Why are you doing this?" She continued watching her simulation progress. 30,000 people depend on these systems. That's not what I mean, he glanced at her. If the colony fails the evaluation, you have grounds to request repatriation. Imperial diplomatic protocols. Jakavith would have to arrange your return. The simulation completed, she began reviewing the output. Is that what you think I want? I don't know what you want, that's why I'm asking. She was quiet for a moment. The simulation was clean, interference signature confirmed, thermal buffer holding across all stress parameters. She pulled up the next modeling layer. I want this colony to continue existing, she said. I want the atmospheric systems to function. I want the 30,000 people who have never personally insulted me to continue breathing. She paused. I also want Jakavith to sit in that office for 4 hours waiting for the failure he came here to document. Davin made a sound that was almost a laugh. It was low and brief and completely unperformed, and it went through her like a signal through a clean relay. That's fair, he said. They worked in silence for a while. The simulations cycled. The rest of the team moved around them with the quiet efficiency of people who had found their rhythm. Then Davin said more quietly, "Is there anything else?" She kept her eyes on the display. The question was simple. It was also not simple at all, and they both knew this, and neither of them moved toward what they both knew, because the work was present and the work was real and it was easier, and perhaps kinder to both of them to remain in it. Ask me again when this is done, she said. He nodded and returned to his display. She felt his attention settle back into the work, warm and steady as a properly calibrated thermal buffer. She thought, this is what it is to be worked beside rather than evaluated. She thought, I did not know this was something that existed. At hour 4, they had it. Complete fault identification. Root cause confirmed, thermal buffer solution tested across 900 simulations with a variance of less than 0.001%. Atmospheric stability maintained under all modeled stress conditions. Efficiency metrics for the solution exceeded current imperial infrastructure standards by a margin significant enough that Dr. Tanaka made Solon check the calculation twice before she would believe it. We're done, Solon said. The room erupted, quietly, in the way of exhausted professionals who expressed relief through exhaled breath and the involuntary relaxation of shoulders held tense for hours. Dr. Tanaka sat back in her chair and covered her face with both hands for 3 seconds, then straightened and began organizing the documentation. Davin looked at Solon. She looked back. 1 hour early, he said. 53 minutes, she pulled up the comm. I'll contact the governor. Jakavith arrived expecting rubble. She could see it in the precise set of his posture as he entered, the minute-forward lean of a man prepared to deliver judgment, the slight prearrangement of his expression toward something that would read as regret while containing none. He looked at the assembled team. He looked at the displays. Something shifted in his face briefly before he controlled it. Dr. Tanaka presented the findings. She did this well, clearly, precisely, without deference or apology. The electromagnetic interference identification, the thermal buffer solution, the efficiency improvement metrics. Jakavith listened with his hands folded and his expression unreadable, and when she finished, he was silent for a moment. Interesting, he said. Your solution architecture shows influence from draconian quantum lattice methodology. His eyes moved to Solon. Tell me, Princess, did you contribute? This was the moment. She had been watching it approach for the past 4 hours the way she watched fault patterns approach in a degrading system. Visible, inevitable, something to be managed rather than avoided. If she said yes, claimed the work as hers, Jakavith would have grounds to trigger an imperial technology transfer violation. Draconian protocols prohibited unauthorized application of proprietary engineering methodology, and the definition of proprietary and unauthorized in imperial code was written to be as broad as required. He would not use it to punish her. He would use it to dissolve the treaty. She had read the relevant statutes at the academy. She had read most things. I consulted on thermal dynamics, she said. Her voice was level. The identification of the core fault and the design of the solution were entirely the work of Dr. Tanaka's team. I confirmed that their approach was consistent with established physics. She held his gaze. Any trained physicist could have provided the same confirmation. Every word was technically true. Every word was constructed to disappear her. Jakavith's expression moved through something she recognized, satisfaction, but a specific kind. The satisfaction of a man who had gotten what he came for even if it wasn't what he'd expected. He believed her performance of inadequacy because he had always believed it. He had believed it before he walked through the door. The evidence in front of him was simply confirming a conclusion he had carried with him from Draconia Prime. Your solution is adequate, he said to Dr. Tanaka. I'll recommend continued treaty support. He looked at Solon one final time. I'm disappointed you remain content with adequacy, Princess. Your father hoped this posting might motivate some development of character. He left, the door closed. The team stood in the aftermath. Someone began to speak, the beginning of celebration, and Solon walked quietly to the edge of the room and stood looking at the atmospheric display, watching the system metrics hold steady, 30,000 lives continuing their ordinary rhythms beneath the amber sky. She heard Davin cross the room toward her. You knew, he said quietly, not an accusation, just an acknowledgement that he had been paying attention. About the technology transfer clause? Yes. You did all of that work and then told him it was barely yours. I told him what would keep the colony intact. She looked at the display. It's what I'm good at, making myself small enough that no one feels threatened by what I can do. That's not what you're good at. His voice was quiet, certain. What you're good at is solving problems that shouldn't be solvable and seeing every variable, including the human ones. What you did tonight was protect 30,000 people by understanding exactly how Jakavith's mind worked and giving him the story he needed to hear. He paused. That's not smallness, that's precision. She turned to look at him. The display light was blue and steady behind her, atmospheric systems nominal, everything held. "He'll go back and tell them I was useless," she said. "Let him." Davin's expression was the same as it had been in the workshop that first morning, attentive, unhurried, taking her seriously in the particular way that still startled her every time. "I know what I saw tonight. So does Tanaka. So does everyone in that room." He looked at her. "So do you." She held his gaze. The thing that had been building for 3 weeks, through early mornings and shared trays and the quiet exchange of a workspace used by two people who had learned each other's habits, pressed quietly against the inside of her chest. "You said to ask you again when it was done," he said. She remembered. "I stayed," she said, "because going back means returning to a place where I am most precisely defined by everything I am not." She kept her voice even because the alternative was something she could not afford in a room full of people. "I stayed because for the first time in my life, someone works beside me rather than waiting for me to fail. Because I fixed a diagnostic scanner at 4 in the morning, and you said show me what you're seeing rather than asking me what I thought I was doing." She paused. "That is not a small thing to me. That is, in fact, the largest thing that has happened to me in 31 years. Davin was quiet for a moment. Outside, the colony breathed its recycled air. The atmospheric processors held their steady rhythm, repaired and nominal and indifferent to everything that happened inside the human and draconian lives sustained by their function. "Okay," he said. Just that, but the way he said it, with the same weight he gave to things he had fully considered and found to be true, made it sufficient. She turned back to the display. After a moment, he turned back to it as well, and they stood together watching the colony's vital signs in a silence that held, for once, something close to peace. The communication came 17 days later, at 3:40, when the workshop belonged only to them. Solon was running thermal models on the Section 9 processor upgrade, an improvement she had designed in the margins of the treaty evaluation work, a refinement so obvious once you saw it that she had spent 2 days assuming someone else had already implemented it before accepting that no one had. Davin was recalibrating the pressure sensors on the secondary atmospheric grid, a task that required the particular focused patience that she had come to think of as his resting state. The workshop was warm and smelled of machine oil, and the spiced grain tea that Petra from hydroponics had been supplying them with for 3 weeks now. The colony was quiet around them. The holographic projector on the wall, used primarily for schematic displays, and the occasional administrative broadcast, activated without input. They both looked up. The figure that materialized was draconian. Female, tall, with the particular elegant severity of someone who had spent decades in proximity to imperial power and absorbed its aesthetics entirely. She wore the deep burgundy of the Science Directorate, a rank insignia at her collar that Solon recognized immediately and felt, somewhere in her chest, like a change in atmospheric pressure. "Princess Solon," the figure said. Her voice was precise, unhurried. "I am Counselor Vane, second voice of the Imperial Science Directorate. I apologize for the hour. I have been given to understand that this is when you work." Solon set down her stylus. Beside her, she felt Davin go still in the particular way he went still when something required his full attention. "Counselor," she said. "I'll be direct." Vane's expression was not unkind, exactly, but it was the expression of someone who had learned that kindness and efficiency occupied different rooms and preferred not to travel between them unnecessarily. Ambassador Jakavith's challenge evaluation was transmitted to the Imperial Archive per standard diplomatic protocol. This includes complete workshop recordings. A pause. "I have reviewed them." Solon said nothing. "The thermal buffer solution represents a 15% improvement over current Imperial infrastructure standards," Vane continued. "The cascade diagnostic methodology you developed is not an extension of existing technique. It is a new technique. Our senior engineering team has spent 11 days attempting to find a precedent for your interference signature identification approach. They have not found one." She held Solon's gaze with the calm attention of someone delivering an assessment they had verified multiple times before speaking. "You solved in 4 hours what I estimated, conservatively, would require 3 weeks and a team of 6. The workshop was very quiet. "I told the ambassador my contribution was minimal," Solon said. "You told the ambassador what was necessary to protect this colony from a sanctions violation." Vane's expression moved slightly, not quite admiration, but its functional neighbor. I am aware of the technology transfer clause and precisely why you invoked self-deprecation as a shield. It was the correct decision. It was also, I suspect, very familiar territory. Solon felt something tighten in her jaw. I'm offering you a position, Vane said. Chief Systems Architect for the Science Directorate. You would have a staff of 300 engineers, full resource authorization, and complete authority over infrastructure development across 14 imperial systems. Your work would be credited, published, and implemented at scale. She paused. You would finally be valued for what you are, for what you can do, not diminished for how you look. The words landed with the particular weight of something true. Solon had spent 31 years building walls against this specific kind of impact, and still she felt it, the image of it, the life it described. A room where her name was on the work. A staff of 300 who would look at her schematics instead of her body. 14 systems running on her mathematics. And if I decline, she said, then you remain here. Vane's voice carried no cruelty, which somehow made it harder. Hiding your brilliance in a colonial workshop, saving lives that no one will record, performing inadequacy for ambassadors who believe the performance because they require it to be true. Something shifted in her expression, the first fully human thing Solon had seen in it. I am not your father, princess. I am not offering you this as a transaction or a condition. I am offering it because I have reviewed your work, and I find the waste of it genuinely offensive. Solon felt Daven's stillness beside her shift slightly. She did not look at him. Give me 48 hours, she said. The offer expires in 48 hours, Vane confirmed. Your father has been informed of your capabilities. He is displeased that you concealed them, but the Directorate operates independently of his preferences in matters of scientific recruitment. He will not interfere. She looked at Solon with the directness of someone who had decided to say the complete thing rather than the diplomatic version of it. You have spent your life being told that what you are cancels what you can do. I am telling you that is wrong. Come and prove it. The projection ended. The workshop resumed its ordinary sounds. The hum of the processors, the faint cycling of the ventilation, the small mechanical rhythms of a place that had become, without announcement, the most comfortable space Solon had occupied in her adult life. She stared at the place where Vane's image had been. Solon, Davin said, I know. She's right about the waste. I know that too. She turned to look at him. He was watching her with that quiet, complete attention, not trying to direct the outcome, not managing her toward the answer he wanted. Simply present. It was the thing she trusted most about him and the thing that made this harder. She asked if you loved me, Solon said. You didn't answer her. The words sat between them, plainly, the way difficult true things sat when there was no longer any reason to arrange them more carefully. Davin set down the calibration tool he had been holding. He looked at it for a moment, then looked at her. I didn't answer because I thought it was obvious, he said. I was apparently wrong about that. She waited. Yes, he said. I love you. He said it the way he said things he had fully assessed and found to be accurate. You dismantled a 40,000 credit scanner at 4 in the morning and explained quantum relay degradation like you were discussing the weather. You stay up recalibrating systems that no one will know were failing until they don't. You eat terrible protein grain without complaint and reorganized every storage cabinet in this workshop into a system I now prefer to my own. He paused. You hum when you're working through a problem, a very specific 3-note pattern. You don't know you're doing it. She had not known she was doing it. And I love you, he continued, quieter now, which is why I think you should go. She looked at him. Vane is right, he said, each word careful, costing something placed down with precision. You deserve to be recognized, not hidden in a sublevel, not protecting yourself by performing smallness for ambassadors. You deserve a room where your name is on the work and 300 people look at your schematics and understand what they're looking at. He held her gaze. I'm a maintenance engineer on a colony that barely makes the trade manifests. I can't give you what Vane is offering. Stop, Solon said. He stopped. She stood, crossed the space between them, which was not very much space, and took his hand, his rough, oil-stained, careful hand, and held it in both of hers. His skin was warm, warmer than draconian. She had noticed this the first time their hands had touched, passing a calibration tool across a workbench, and had thought about it more than was professionally appropriate. Do you know what I was before you? She said. He started to answer. She continued. I was 31 years of correct answers that no one recorded, top percentile in 7 disciplines with a certificate and a suggestion to pursue administration. I was the insult wrapped in silk, the embarrassment shipped across light years because my father calculated that I would cause less damage at a distance. Her voice stayed level because she needed it to. I was brilliant in a vacuum. I was achieving things in empty rooms and filing the results in archives that no one accessed and telling myself that the work mattered even when no one saw it. She looked at him. I had built a very effective replica of a life. The workshop hummed around them. Then you sat down across from me at a table, she said, and you asked what the servants cooked. Not that must have been difficult or your father should have. You asked what they cooked. She felt the pressure behind her sternum that she had been cataloging for weeks, identifiable now. Vane offers recognition, which I thought for 31 years was the thing I needed most, but you offered something I did not know was available. She held his gaze. You offered me someone who listened, who looked at me like my presence was the reasonable and expected outcome of me being a person in a room, like I didn't need to justify taking up space. Davin was very still. I am not going, she said. I am staying here in this workshop with you because I love you, because I would rather be unknown here where I am seen than celebrated somewhere I am merely useful. He exhaled a long, quiet breath. Something in his posture released. He turned his hand in hers and held on. Then she said, there is something we haven't discussed. I know. I live for centuries, she said. You don't. The sentence was very small for the thing it contained. They both understood this. She watched it move across his face, not shock, because he had known. She could see that he had known for some time, but the full weight of it, accepted rather than processed, taken in rather than argued with. I know, he said again. I will watch you age, she said. I will watch you become old while I remain as I am now, and then I will watch you, she stopped. I need you to understand that I am choosing this with full knowledge of what it costs. I know what it costs me too, he said. You'll outlive me by 200 years, you'll carry this when I can't anymore. He looked at her with complete seriousness. You're sure? I'm sure, she said. Decades of being loved truly is more than most people receive in any lifespan. He raised his other hand and touched her face, the ridge of her jaw, the place where draconian and human aesthetics had nothing to say to each other, and it didn't matter. His thumb traced her cheekbone with the same care he gave to things he valued. She leaned into it. Then we're agreed, he said. We're agreed. Outside, Saturn hung somewhere above the methane clouds, enormous and indifferent and extraordinarily beautiful. The colony breathed. The atmospheric processors held their steady rhythm, nominal, reliable, the sound of 30,000 lives continuing. In the workshop, they stood together in the particular silence of people who have said the true thing and found it sufficient. The response to Vane was sent at dawn. Solon wrote it herself precisely, without ceremony. I am grateful for the recognition. I decline the position. I have found work that matters and a place where the work is seen. This is sufficient. She considered adding more. She did not. The transmission sent. She set down the comm and stood at the workbench looking at the Section 9 schematics, the thermal model half complete on the display. The specific problem she had been working on before the world had briefly offered itself in a different shape. She picked up her stylus. She returned to the model. Davin came in at 600 with 2 cups of the spiced grain tea, set one beside her display without interrupting her work, and settled at his own station. The workshop filled with its ordinary sounds. Outside, Titan's sky moved through its slow amber gradations toward the particular quality of light that she had come to think of as morning. At 800, the Imperial seal activated on the comm. They both looked up. Emperor Vorak materialized above the projector, tall, severe, wearing the full Imperial formal register as though even a private communication required an audience. His face was the face she had grown up with. She had spent a long time learning to read it. She read it now, controlled, assessing, and somewhere beneath the control, something she could not immediately name. Solon, he said. Father, I have reviewed Counselor Vane's report. I have also reviewed the workshop recordings. A pause. It appears I made errors in my assessment of your capabilities. You made errors in several assessments, she said, not loudly, precisely. Something moved in his expression. Surprise, possibly. She had not spoken to him this way before. She had not been anywhere that made it possible. The directorate's offer stands, he said. I will add to it personally, Accept and I will reinstate your full royal status, chambers in the upper palace, and a formal record of your academic and technical achievements. His voice carried the particular cadence of a man who had made very few offers he expected to be refused. Your physical, he paused, selected something. Your appearance will be noted in the official record as secondary to your technical contributions. Overlooked, Solon said. Accommodated. You said overlooked. The emperor was quiet for a moment. You sent me here as an insult, Solon said, each word placed carefully with the precision she brought to systems work. You calculated that I would be humiliated by the posting, that I would suffer adequately and disappear adequately and eventually become a detail in a footnote about a minor diplomatic gesture. She kept her voice level. You transmitted 4 words to me the night before my departure. Your presence there is the point. I read them 3 times. I packed my case. I came here expecting to disappear. Vorek said nothing. And something happened that you did not anticipate, she continued. Someone saw me. Not my failures, not my body, not the accumulation of ways I did not meet your standards. He saw my work. He sat down across from me and asked what the servants cooked and listened to the answer. And the following morning, when I had dismantled his most expensive piece of equipment, he said, "Show me what you're seeing." She looked at her father's image with the full steadiness of someone who had nothing left to perform for him. He loved me not because I was useful or adequate or sufficiently corrected. He loved me because I was present, because I was real. Vorek's gaze moved to Davan, standing at the edge of the frame. Cold, appraising, the look of a man performing a calculation. This mechanic, he said. This man, Solon said, has more genuine honor than your entire directorate. You would choose a colonial maintenance worker over restoration, over recognition. A pause, over your own people. I would choose love over a place that required me to diminish myself to exist in it. She held his gaze. You offer everything I thought I needed. He offered the one thing you never considered offering, value without conditions. Vorek was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, not softened, but shifted into something older and colder. When he dies, he said, as all humans die, their lives brief as a false cycle, flickering past, while you remain, you will be alone again. You will have given up empire for a love measured in decades. She felt it, the specific surgical placement of it, the way it found the exact wound she and Davan had opened between them the night before and pressed. She felt Davan go still beside her with the stillness of someone absorbing a blow without responding to it. Then I will have decades of being loved truly, she said, which is more than you have managed in 3 centuries of rule. Vorek's face went blank, the particular blankness of a man who has controlled his expression for so long that loss of control reads as its absence. Then he said, quietly, You are your mother's daughter. Something crossed his face when he said it, something she had never seen there before and did not have a name for. It was gone before she could examine it. My mother chose you, Solon said, and you made her life into a demonstration of what happens to people who require more than you were willing to give. She paused. I hope my choices improve on hers. If you refuse, Vorek said, the formality returning, the aperture closing, there will be no further offers. You remain in exile. The directorate will not extend this again. I understand. He looked at her for a moment. The full weight of it, 31 years of a specific kind of distance. A father who had measured her and found the measurement unsatisfying and never once questioned the instrument. She held his gaze without armor, without performance, simply present, which was the most difficult thing she had ever done in front of him. Farewell, daughter, he said. Farewell, father. The transmission ended. The workshop was very quiet. Solon stood in the silence for a long moment, feeling the size of what had just closed. A door she had been standing outside for 31 years, and now it was shut, and she was standing on the correct side of it. The grief and the relief arrived simultaneously and were, she found, nearly indistinguishable from each other. Davan crossed to her. He did not say anything. He put his arms around her and she leaned into the warmth of him, solid and present and here, and felt her chest unclench in a way that had no analog in any technical language she knew. I burned it, she said into his shoulder. I know. All of it. I know, his arms tightened slightly. Are you all right? She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. The empire behind her shut, the workshop around her warm. The Section 9 thermal model half-finished on the display, waiting. 30,000 people breathing recycled air in the amber light of a distant sun. Yes, she said. She meant it. The transmission came 11 days later, during the quiet hours. Solon was at the diagnostic terminal reviewing thermal buffer performance data. The solution had held perfectly, better than perfectly, and she had been running comparative analyses against Imperial infrastructure benchmarks in the private, uncommitted way she did things she did not yet want to examine as hope, when the workshop's secondary comm panel activated without her initiating it. The Imperial seal materialized in blue light above the console. She stood up slowly. A woman who appeared was perhaps 60 in draconian years, which placed her true age somewhere between 2 and 3 centuries. She wore the deep gray of the science directorate with the easy authority of someone who had worn it long enough that it had become simply her skin. Her face was sharp, carefully composed, not unkind, which Solon identified immediately as more dangerous than cruelty. Cruelty was easy to refuse. Genuine regard from an unexpected direction required something more careful. Princess Solon, the woman said, I am Counselor Vane, second voice of the Imperial Science Directorate. Solon said nothing. She stood with her hands at her sides and waited. Ambassador Jakavith's challenge was transmitted to Imperial archives as standard protocol documentation. Vane's expression held something that might have been amusement. Standard protocol also requires full workshop recording during any formal evaluation. I have reviewed everything. The silence stretched. Your electromagnetic interference identification was completed in under 10 minutes, Vane continued. Your thermal buffer solution exceeded our current infrastructure standard by 14%. The cascade diagnostic methodology you developed to trace the fault origin is, to my knowledge, original. Our best systems team estimated that problem class would require 3 weeks of full team analysis. She paused. You solved it in 4 hours alone, having never seen the specific system architecture involved. I had assistance, Solon said. Davin Reyes identified the coolant system connection, Dr. Tanaka's team. Do not, Vane said with quiet firmness, do that in front of me. I've watched the recordings. I know precisely what each person contributed. I'm not interested in your performance of inadequacy. I've seen enough of it. Solon was quiet. I am offering you a position, Vane said. Chief Systems Architect for the Science Directorate, your own facility, a staff of 300 engineers, full authority over infrastructure development across 14 Imperial systems, unlimited research resources. She held Solon's gaze. You would be the youngest person to hold that position in 2 centuries. You would hold it because no one in the Directorate is more qualified. The workshop was very still. Somewhere in the system, the thermal buffer Solon had designed hummed at its steady, correct frequency. And my father, Solon said carefully, has been informed of your capabilities. He is displeased that you concealed them, but he will not interfere. The Directorate operates with sufficient independence. Vane's expression shifted slightly, not to warmth, but to something adjacent. Solon, you have spent your life in a system that defined you by everything it chose to see instead of everything you are. I am offering you the correction of that, work that matches your mind, recognition that cannot be revoked. A place built for someone of your capability, rather than a place you have learned to survive in. The workshop door opened. Davin came in with a secondary coolant diagnostic in hand, mid-thought, already talking. The Section 9 thermal variance is holding, but I want to run a secondary. He stopped. He read the room in the particular way he had, quickly and without performance. His eyes moved from Solon to the Imperial seal to Solon again. Vane looked at him with the attentive appraisal of someone filing information. The mechanic, she said. Davin Reyes, he said, not unfriendly, not deferential. Counselor Vane, Science Directorate. She looked at him for a moment. Then, with the directness that appeared to be her fundamental mode, do you love her? The question hit the room like a pressure change. Solon felt the air alter. Davin looked at Vane. He did not look at Solon, which she understood, because she could not look at him either, and both of them not looking at each other was its own form of acknowledgement that this question had found something real. That's not a straightforward question to answer in front of a stranger, he said. I'll simplify it then. Vane's voice was measured, not cruel. If you care for her truly with her interests considered alongside your own, then you understand what I'm offering. She will always be the princess sent as a joke here. That is the story this colony knows, and it is a story that does not change because stories of that kind never do. She will always be hiding what she is. She will always be making herself small enough that people feel comfortable with her presence. She paused. With the directorate, she would be celebrated, not tolerated, not accommodated, celebrated for precisely what she is. Davin was quiet. He set the diagnostic tool down on the nearest bench. He looked at the floor for a moment, the way he looked at problems he was working through, not lost, not uncertain, just deliberate. Solon watched him. She thought, he is going to say I should go. She thought, he will say it because he means it, and he will mean it because he is that kind of person, and that is. She stopped the thought because she could not complete it without the completion costing her something she could not afford to lose in this moment. "Give us a moment," Davin said to Vane. Vane nodded. The transmission did not end. Solon understood she was simply moving herself to the side, still present, still watching. An imperial habit. Davin crossed the workshop to where Solon stood. He stopped a foot away, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, which they had been doing, she realized, for weeks, not quite allowing it to be what it was, holding it at the careful distance of something too valuable to examine directly. "She's right about one thing," he said quietly. "You've been making yourself small here, I've watched it. Every time someone looks at you wrong, every time you let Jackaveth or Roar or anyone take something from you and file it away like it doesn't matter." His jaw tightened slightly. "It does matter, and I should have said that more directly." "Davin, let me finish." He looked at her steadily. "You deserve to be somewhere that sees you, completely, not just me at 4 in the morning in a sub-level workshop. You deserve the full version of that." He paused. His voice remained level, which she understood was costing him something. "So if this is what you want, if that's the right place for your work, for your life, then I think you should go." Solon looked at him for a long moment. She heard the thermal buffer humming. She heard the atmospheric processors, all of them, running at their correct frequencies, the entire colony breathing in its steady rhythm. She thought about the cold open on the bench, the spice jar from Petra in the hydroponics bay, the morning he had said, "I'm tired of watching it cost you something." She thought about walking through the doors of the Imperial Science Directorate and having everyone in the room stand, and finding that the room was full of people who respected her mind, and not one of them had ever sat down across from her at a cafeteria table without being asked. "You said you fix things," she said. He looked at her. "Yes." "You said you're good at seeing what's broken versus what's been treated badly." She kept her voice steady. "I have been treated badly for a very long time. I know the difference between a place that has begun to treat me correctly and a place that is offering me compensation for how badly I was treated everywhere else." She paused. "Vane is offering me recognition. You offered me something first. You offered me mourning." Something shifted in his face, subtle, contained, the internal version of something larger. "If I go," she continued, "I will be celebrated for what I can produce. That is not nothing, but I will not be." She stopped, started again. "You look at me and the first thing you see is not what I can do. You see me and then you see what I can do, and I have never had those two things in the correct order before." Her voice was very controlled. "I am not willing to trade that for recognition. I am not willing to trade mourning for applause." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, in the workshop with the Imperial Counselor muted to the side, and the colony breathing above them and Saturn hanging unseen behind the amber clouds, "I love you." The words came out simply, without architecture around them. "I know that's not a straightforward thing to say either," he continued. "And I know what it means, the length of things, the difference in how long I know all of that. But you asked me something 3 weeks ago and I didn't answer it correctly, and I'm not going to do that twice." He met her eyes. "I love you, and whatever you decide, I wanted you to know that clearly before you decided it." Solon held his gaze. She felt the thing behind her sternum that had been building since the morning she woke up, and realized she was looking forward to going to the workshop. Not to the work, not to the systems, to the specific quality of the silence there, to the person in it. She turned to the comm panel and brought Vane back. "Counselor," she said. Vane unmuted herself with the expression of someone who had been listening anyway. "Princess. Your offer is genuine and I understand its value. I understand what you are trying to correct and I believe you mean it." Solon kept her voice level. "I am declining." Vane was quiet for a moment. "May I ask why?" "Because recognition from a structure that should never have withheld it is not the same as being seen." She looked at the thermal buffer data still running on the terminal beside her. "I built something here, not a career, not a position, a place where I exist correctly. That is not replaceable with resources and a staff of 300. She paused. I would rather do genuine work in a place that is genuinely mine than important work in a place that has decided to forgive me for what I am. Vane was silent. Her expression moved through something Solon could not fully read, not quite disappointment, not quite respect, some compound of both. The offer will not be extended a third time, she said. I know. A pause, then Vane said unexpectedly, your methodology for the cascade diagnostic, the fault-tracing architecture, would you be willing to publish it, academically, independent of the directorate? Something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. It should exist. It is too good to remain in a sub-level workshop on Titan. Solon looked at her. I'll consider it. Vane nodded once. The imperial seal dissolved. The workshop was quiet. Solon stood looking at the space where the transmission had been, the air where an empire had just made its case and been refused, which felt different than she had expected it to feel. Not triumphant, not even entirely certain. More like stepping off a structure she had been standing on and finding that the ground was closer than she feared. Davin had not moved. He was still standing where he had been, with the particular stillness of someone who understood that the next moment required her to find it first. She crossed to him, stopped close enough that she could see the specific quality of his attention, the way he looked at her always, as though she were something fully worth understanding. He was right, she said, about one thing. Davin waited. You will die before me. The words were plain. She had made the decision to say them plainly rather than carry them alone because she was finished carrying things alone when there was someone beside her to share the weight. Draconian lifespan, human lifespan, the arithmetic is not kind. I will watch you age. I will watch, she stopped. That is a real thing. I am not pretending it is not a real thing. No, he said, it's not. I chose this knowing that. I know you did. I want you to know that I chose it with full information. She held his gaze. I chose it because decades of being loved correctly is worth more than centuries of being tolerated elegantly. I chose it because you said, show me what you're seeing, and that has not stopped mattering. She paused. And I chose it because I am tired of making decisions based on what I am afraid to lose. I would rather lose you at the end of a life we built than keep myself safe from losing you by never having had you. Davin was quiet for a moment. Outside, the refinery lights were coming on for the evening cycle, amber bleeding through the narrow workshop window. That's the most precisely terrifying thing anyone has ever said to me, he said. I know, I'm sorry. Don't be. He reached out and took her hand, careful, deliberate, the way he did everything, and held it with the warmth of someone who understood the value of what they were holding. I chose it too, with full information. She looked at their hands. His, calloused and human warm, which was something she had decided months ago to stop thinking of as a category and start thinking of simply as Davin. Hers, cooler, green in the amber light, substantial, the hands her father had described as a disappointment, and an engineer she admired had described as extraordinary. We should probably tell Governor Pell, she said. Davin made a sound that was fully a laugh this time, genuine, low, briefly undoing the contained seriousness of his face. Pell already knows. He's been leaving extra coffee supplies in the workshop for 6 weeks. She looked at him. He has. He's anxious, not unobservant. She held his hand and looked at the amber window and felt the colony breathing around them. Steady and enormous and entirely unaware of the two people in the sub-level workshop who had just, quietly, irrevocably, chosen each other over everything else either of them had been offered. Outside, Saturn was rising behind the methane clouds, invisible present, its gravity holding everything in its patient orbit. She thought, I burned the bridges. She thought, the ground is closer than I feared. She thought, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. 5 years passed the way Titan seasons passed, slowly, in gradations of amber, each shift so incremental you only understood it had happened when you looked back and could no longer find where it had begun. The workshop had changed. Not structurally, it was still the same sub-level space with the same mismatched equipment and the same narrow window overlooking the refinery sector. But it had acquired the particular quality of a place that had been inhabited by two people long enough to become legible as theirs. Her technical journals shelved beside his maintenance logs, the spines worn from repeated handling. A second chair at the central workbench, positioned at the angle she preferred, which Davin had adjusted 18 months ago without comment and never moved back. A photograph of Saturn taken from the observation deck on their first anniversary, her idea to take it, his idea to frame it, both of them pretending it had been spontaneous. A small jar of dried root from the hydroponics bay, refilled every few weeks by Petra, who had never once been asked and had never once mentioned it. The colony had grown. Not dramatically, New Cascade was not a place people came to for ambition, only for work and for the particular satisfaction of work that mattered. But the population had edged toward 35,000. A new residential sector had been constructed along the eastern perimeter, and the atmospheric systems that Solon had quietly rebuilt over 4 years ran with an efficiency that made visiting engineers from other settlements ask questions and take notes. She answered the questions and let the notes go wherever they went. She had published the Cascade diagnostic methodology under her name, as she had told Vane she would consider, and it had been incorporated into 3 separate imperial infrastructure frameworks without acknowledgement. She had expected this. She had filed the paper away and moved to the next problem. Other offers had come. 4 over 5 years from sources ranging from independent research consortiums to a Jovian colony cooperative to a second, more carefully worded communication from the Science Directorate, not Vane this time, a junior administrator, which told her something about how the original refusal had been received. She had declined them all, not without reading them. Not without the quiet, honest reckoning she had promised herself she would always perform, checking that her choice remained a choice and not simply a habit. Each time the answer was the same. She was here. This was hers. The arithmetic was unchanged. Davin's hair had begun showing gray at the temples sometime in the 3rd year. She had noticed on a Tuesday morning and said nothing, and he had noticed her noticing and also said nothing. And they had drunk their coffee in the comfortable silence that was the primary language of their mornings, and that had been, without either of them deciding it, the most reliable constant of her life on Titan. She still looked exactly as she had on the day the transport descended through the methane clouds. She was aware of this every time she looked at him. She suspected he was aware of it also, every time he looked at her. They did not discuss it often. When they did, they discussed it plainly, which was the only way either of them knew how to hold difficult things, bring them into the light, examine them honestly, set them down without pretending they were not heavy. On a Tuesday morning in the 5th year, a transmission arrived with the Imperial seal. Not Vane, not the Directorate. The seal was the primary Imperial sigil, gold and gray, the one used only for communications originating from the Emperor's personal office. Solon was alone in the workshop. Davin was 2 levels up dealing with a Section 12 coolant variance, a simple job, expected back within the hour. She looked at the seal for a moment before accepting the transmission, because she understood that the moment before a thing arrives is the last moment in which you have not yet received it, and she had learned to respect those moments. She accepted it. Her father appeared above the console. Emperor Vorak was, as she remembered, tall, severe, the particular lean elegance of a man who had made his body a doctrine, and then lived inside the doctrine until he could no longer distinguish between the belief and the believer. He was 270 years old. He looked as he had looked when she was 8, when she was 14, when she was 23, and standing in a transport bay being processed for exile. Time moved through draconian emperors the way wind moved through stone, not without effect, but slowly, the changes geological rather than personal. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen from him before, which was to say, he looked at her with no expression prearranged. She had always been able to read his face in advance. It was one of the skills survival had taught her. He arrived at conversations with his response already composed, already installed. He was not doing that now. Solon, he said. Father. A pause. The transmission delay was 4 minutes each direction. She was receiving a message sent 8 minutes ago, speaking into a void that would reach him in 4 more. Every communication with Draconia was a conversation with the past, responses crossing in the dark. She had found this, over time, oddly appropriate. I have reviewed the infrastructure integration report from the Directorate, he said. The Cascade diagnostic framework and the thermal buffer improvements have been implemented across 9 Imperial systems. The efficiency gains are significant. He paused. The pause was in the recording. He had known he was pausing, had allowed it. The authorship attribution in internal documents reads as anonymous colonial consultation. I corrected this. Your name is now in the record. Solon looked at him. Counselor Vane made a case for this correction before her retirement last year, he continued. I delayed the decision longer than was warranted. I am making it now. Another pause. I am also correcting a second record. The formal citation for your Imperial Academy performance has been updated to reflect your actual standing. The Medal of Excellence has been awarded retroactively. It will be listed in the Imperial Honor Rolls. He held her gaze across 8 minutes of dark and distance. Your achievements are correctly attributed. They should have been so from the beginning. She understood what this was. Not an apology. Her father was not constructed for apologies. It was a correction, an administrative adjustment to the record. He was speaking the only language he had, which was the language of official acknowledgement, and he was saying in that language, I was wrong. It was not what she had needed from him once. She examined whether it was what she needed from him now. She found with some surprise that the answer was simply, no. Not because it came too late, though it did. Not because it was insufficient, though it was. But because she had stopped building herself on the foundation of what he thought of her. The foundation she had now was made of other materials entirely, and it did not require his correction to stand. I also received a report, her father said, and his voice shifted slightly, an almost imperceptible change in register, from the Atmospheric Systems Consortium on Callisto. They implemented your coolant monitoring protocol 6 months ago. Their failure rate has dropped by 61%. 3,200 people who would have experienced life support interruptions did not. He looked at her. They know the protocol's author. The people on Callisto know your name. She sat with this for a moment. 3,200 people breathing on Callisto. She had not known about Callisto. She thought about what it meant to do work that moved through the world after you sent it, finding people you would never meet. She thought this is also a form of being seen. She thought it is not the same form, but it is real. I understand the offer of restoration will not be renewed, her father said. I am not renewing it, I am simply, he stopped. For the first time in her memory, Emperor Vorak stopped mid-sentence without having reached his intended end. He looked at something off-screen for a moment, then back. You are your mother's daughter, he said. She would have done the same, she would have chosen exactly as you chose. He paused. She was right about most things. I was not always willing to acknowledge that, while she was here to hear it. He said nothing further. The transmission ended. The Imperial seal dissolved. Solon sat in the quiet workshop for a while. She was not sure what she felt. Not vindicated. That word implied she had been waiting for his acknowledgement to confirm something, and she had not been waiting for a long time now. Not healed, some corrections came too late to be medicine, could only be accepted as information. What she felt was, perhaps, the particular closure of a door you have stopped using, not dramatic, not final in an emotional sense, simply the acknowledgement that you no longer need to go back through it. She heard Davin in the corridor before he reached the door, his particular footfall, unhurried, pausing briefly at the junction where the coolant line ran close to the wall, an old habit from years of listening for false sounds as he walked. He came in and read the room with the quick, attending accuracy that had never, in 5 years, failed to see her correctly. Emperor, he said. Yes. He crossed to the bench and sat in the second chair, the one at her preferred angle, and looked at her. Not pushing, not managing. Simply present, which was what she had learned, slowly and with increasing certainty, was the most valuable thing one person could offer another. He corrected the record, she said. My academy standing, my name in the infrastructure documentation. She paused. He said my mother would have chosen as I chose. Davin was quiet for a moment. How are you? I don't know yet. She looked at her hands on the workbench, the technical journal open in front of her, the schematics she had been working on before the transmission, the ordinary ongoing work of her ordinary ongoing life. I think I'm all right. I think it's, she stopped, started again. It doesn't change anything. That's not a grievance, it's just true. The record is corrected, and I'm still here, and the colony still needs the Section 9 variants looked at, and Petra left spices on the bench this morning, and none of that changes. No, Davin said, it doesn't. I thought it would feel like more. Did you want it to? She considered this. Outside, the refinery lights were warming toward mid-cycle, the amber thickening to gold. Saturn was visible today. She could see its edge through the workshop window, a pale arc above the methane clouds, enormous and patient and ringed with the particular beauty of things that simply continue to be what they are regardless of whether they are observed. I wanted his acknowledgement for a very long time, she said. I wanted it so badly that I performed everything he required and still couldn't earn it, and eventually I stopped performing and stopped wanting it and built something that didn't need it. She looked at the arc of Saturn through the window. Getting it now feels like receiving a correction to a map of a country I no longer live in. Accurate, not useless, but not mine anymore. Davin looked at the window. That sounds like the right thing, he said quietly. Does it? Being free of needing something from someone who couldn't give it properly. That sounds like the right thing, yes. She looked at him, at the gray at his temples, the lines beginning at the corners of his eyes, the specific quality of his face after 5 years of her learning it the way she learned systems. Thoroughly, attentively, finding the patterns that mattered. He was 43 years old. She was 36, which meant, in draconian terms, something closer to the very early edge of middle age, and she did not let herself think about that arithmetic often because the arithmetic was not the point. The point was the morning. The point was always the morning. Ask me, she said. He knew what she meant. It had become, over 5 years, the question they returned to. Not from doubt, she had understood the shape of her choice from the moment she made it. But as a practice, a deliberate returning to the foundation to confirm it was still holding. Do you regret staying? He said. She thought about Titan's amber sky, and the Section 4 oxygen scrubbers in Petra's spice jar, and the photograph of Saturn and the 3,200 people on Callisto who were breathing, because she had built something worth building. She thought about Davin saying, "Show me what you're seeing," to a woman who had taken apart his diagnostic scanner at 4 in the morning without permission. She thought about the workshop, which was hers and his, and full of work that mattered, and a silence that had never once been empty. Not for a single second, she said. He reached across the bench and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over and held it. Outside, the colony worked and breathed and continued its patient existence. In the eastern sector, the new atmospheric monitors she had designed were running their first full operational cycle, their readings clean and nominal. Somewhere above them, Saturn held its rings with the casual gravity of something that had simply always been there, indifferent to observation, faithful to its own enormous physics. In the workshop, 2 people sat with their hands folded together across a workbench covered in schematics, and held the kind of silence that is not the absence of something but the presence of everything necessary. And the morning light came in amber and gold through the narrow window, and the colony breathed, and the systems held, and the day continued.